You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hello and welcome back to episode 217 of Arsenal Pass. Hayden here with Pankaj, Bhojwani as always. This week on the pod, we are talking US Nationals. We're talking metagame as we head towards the Nationals season that kicks off not this weekend, but next weekend. This weekend, we do go to a calling in Italy, I believe. The calling this weekend?
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to say Bologna, but
I think it might be Florence, but we'll double check that. It is Bologna. You're right. I'm wrong. It is Bologna this coming weekend. So yeah, lots of things to talk about meta-wise, but of course, first of all, Pankaj, your week in Flesh and Blood. You had a pretty good weekend, I heard.
it was a fun weekend for sure. Yeah, my weekend was casting US Nationals. I did nothing else in Flesh and Blood apart from that.
No games?
Except maybe continue Marlin brewing. Yeah, I just brewed some Marlin. No, I didn't actually play anything. Yeah, it was 3 days of casting US Nats. I was partnered up with Brian for the weekend. This time, did get to do a couple of games with Ellie, and it was absolute blast as always.
Yeah, I mean, blast watching it. I think another amazing job by the team, yourself, Sam, Ethan, everyone involved. Just great to see. I guess, honestly, just from my perspective, I think it's interesting. Once you've been on the other side, like on the cover side, you start to notice a lot more about the production elements and things like that. And even just like when the overlay opened up on the first game, I was like, oh, cool, this is like, it looks better. Like there's, even just quality of life improvements and things like that. So, and then the games themselves, I mean, there were some fantastic games over the weekend. So if you haven't gone and checked the US Nationals coverage out from the weekend, I mean, go and do so. You're going to see a lot of decks that you wouldn't have seen before. I love that. The team, that yourself and the team highlighted a lot of matchups that were going to be new to the format, decks that maybe we hadn't seen yet, or new takes on decks as well. So, and then the top 8 was a really interesting spread as well. So the Sunday games were also fantastic.
It was definitely awesome seeing all the new stuff come out as well. Lots of buzz, and we'll get more into that in the main topic, is where we go from here, because I do think US Nats sort of historically as well, and this year's no different, sort of sets the stage for like the next few nationals in some to some extent.
Definitely.
Where the next few nationals are like sort of looking at the meta of US Nats and the winner of US Nats, and then they sort of adapt accordingly and maybe adopt certain things that they see. So
yeah,
it's gonna be super interesting to see how it evolves.
I want to ask a question. We're going to talk all about Classic Constructed, so I want to just take this brief moment to talk about Limited. What did you think of Draft? What did you think of how players adapted from the World Premiere to this first weekend of Nationals, or I guess 0.5 week of Nationals, and just the format overall?
I'm actually so glad you brought that up, because I did have something I wanted to talk about Limited, where I think the general sentiment of really enjoying this Limited format continued to be echoed throughout the entire event. If you actually go listen to Lucas's top 8 interview, it's so funny. Brian Gottlieb calls him out about their Twitter drama they had, I don't know, a year or two ago, where he was like, you should simply get good at Limited, and Lucas had a little bit of a, I don't know, like a strange response to that or something. And then anyway, so they brought that up. Brian was interviewing him, and I was like, oh, looks like you got good at Limited. And Lucas shot back with, it's because there is a good Limited format to get good at this time. It was really funny. So basically everyone was in high spirits regarding the High Seas Limited format. And it was awesome. It was great to watch as well. It was great to cover, both on the drafting side and in the gameplay side. Though one thing I'm wondering about as we move forward is that I have yet to see a strong Puffin performance.
Yeah.
And in US Nationals as well, you look at the top tables that we were covering, the Puffins consistently were 1-2 or worse. Even like when it was a 2-off Puffin in the pod, they're like both playing the O2 bracket sort of thing. So I'm curious whether the hero just hasn't been figured out yet, or whether maybe that's like a one blemish on this draft format where like one of the heroes is actually not as viable. So I'm curious to see how that evolves, and I hope it's actually people just haven't figured it out yet, and then something's gonna happen, and then we do have, so because I do want this limited format to continue to have the reputation of, oh, it's awesome, but I can't help but notice that Puffin is always lagging behind.
Yeah, maybe I'll transition to my week in Flesh and Blood because I played a lot of Limited over the weekend. Did a bit of a draft camp on Sunday, 3 drafts, which is great. Plus, have been drafting a bit over the week, drafted over pre-release weekend, etc. I think the conclusion that I'm coming to, so it's interesting to hear that from you in terms of seeing that from Puffin, because probably sort of 3 or 4 days ago, the conclusion I was starting to come to is, from my experience, is that Puffin is the definitely the toughest hero to build. I think things have to go a little bit right for you in the draft. I think I honestly sometimes, like, someone will post like a 3-0 Puffin deck. They're like, oh, here's my 3-0 Puffin deck. And I'm like, I've had a really similar deck to this and it's felt like a 1-2 or a 2-1. Like, I don't have a good handle necessarily still on what a 3-0 Puffin deck looks like, I think. Starting to get a little bit more understanding of some of the cards that I think are a little bit overrated, underrated, etc. Learning a bit more about Puffin. I think what I'm now starting to lean towards is that I think it's the 2-of hero. I think it's probably correct a lot of the time for it to be the 2-of hero. I think it needs the most specific cards, I think, for the game plans to come together. I think the Spitfire can be real, but I think it definitely requires having a particular Majestic in your open end draft, and then also being able to build around it. So I generally think that it is blunderbuss and is a fairly... I think it's not what people have been trying to do with the hero, which is the old traditional mech thing of lots of mech cards and go really aggressive. Because people have responded by playing very defensively into Puffin. They try to keep you off gold for as long as possible. So things like Turbine then become very important. And then when you take the tempo, often from your opponent after they block out, you can't always capitalize. And then you start to get into fatigue territory against things like Marlin, which is kind of interesting. So anyway, I think the limited format is very, very interesting. I've been loving it. I've honestly been having a phenomenal time with all my drafts, learning so much. I think this format is so deep. I don't know if it's going to be a blemish, like you say, but I do think it is very difficult. And even honestly, I think it's okay to have a weaker of the 3 heroes. I think that's okay because naturally the meta will adapt and it will be the least drafted hero. I think that is okay. But it's got to be within a certain parameter, right, for it to still feel good. And I think we're probably within that parameter, which is good.
Hopefully, yeah. I guess I was coming at it from, I hope this isn't like the Riptide
for sure
of the outside, right? You know, where it's like, oh, there's one unplayable hero. And when it's 3, you feel that a lot more. Also, I'm glad you've come around on Goldwing Turbine. Like I said in our limited set review, I did think the card was very good. Glad to hear on that. Coming back to the Spitfire discussion, yeah. I think the best hole might actually be in like a Nimblism Puffin sort of archetype.
It's part of that as well.
Point, I'm guessing you meant Cog in the Machine as like the Majestic you need to open to run the Spitfire.
I think that it does a massive amount of work for you with the Spitfire piece because it gives you... Because what happens if you flip over Spitfire as your opponent goes, I'm going to fatigue you. Because Puffin is already quite susceptible to fatigue, I think. And just, it's fatigued by damage, but just the way it shakes out, it doesn't have as natural, like it has a lot of like 2-block non-attacks. It wants some other 2 blocks that are very important, I think, in the deck. So I think that card just makes sure that you can get through in the end game, if you have to turtle up a little bit to play a bit more value in the mid game, for your opponent trying to just like use cards defensively or throw 3 for 7s at you, etc. But yeah, I do agree. I think Nimblism, being very aggressive, it's basically saying, well, actually, I don't want to play many yellows and blues. I want to play a lot of reds and a lot of 0 costs, and I want to go, I want to go very fast. Just on the Goldwing Turbine, I think the card is important. I don't actually think it's that good. But
okay. So you think it's more like a necessary evil in a sense,
kind of, which is what I'm trying to reckon with in this format is what that. I think that honestly, there's a real pivot point around Goldwing Turbine for Puffins in this format. I am trying to find ways to not have to play many or any of that card in my deck, but it's tough. Puffin's weird, honestly. I think Puffin's just so tough, and I think it's going to take till we get to Singapore for it to be worked out.
As we're talking about this, it really feels like Puffin is like a Bright Lights hero that snuck her way onto like the high seas meta and into the high seas draft. Like in many ways, just in terms of her being like very hard to figure out as well, because I think Bright Lights was a format where, like, especially like Dash.io in particular, I think was difficult to figure out for people. Like there was a lot of depth to it. You needed a while to work on it before you understood that. And to be honest, in CC as well, I think Puffin seems to be the least solved, if you will, and like the least, I don't know, like impactful even for now at least. So it does feel like it's a Bright Lights-ish vibes coming out from Puffins.
Yeah, we'll quickly cover all 3 new heroes as we get into the start of our main topic. I want to go to the news first of all, and US Nationals, of course, this past weekend. where my co-host was casting and did a fantastic job. Congratulations, great job. But also, the congratulations aren't just reserved for you because you were just casting. Massive congratulations.
I started cheering because I thought you were going to say who the winner
I know.
was. And
I saw that. I thought I'd start delaying it.
Congratulated me, and I was like, this feels weird now.
I know I set you up for that one. Congratulations to Marjan Bay, to Caleb for taking it down on Verdance. Obviously, Pankaj, very happy, a good friend of yours, an awesome person. Honestly, big fan of his, love his work, love what he's been doing in Flesh and Blood and getting more involved. Obviously, as a content creator from other games in the past, and now really put down roots in Flesh and Blood. Has had results previously as well, right? A second place at calling LA at the Pro Tour, battle hard and wins, etc. I think a top 32, maybe at PT. I think this is finally had his breakthrough, and has gotten better at limited. So congratulations to Caleb. Went 5-1 in drafts. So finally Marjan Bay's put that together. So yeah, just massive congratulations. There was also calling in the weekend as well, which was limited, Bright Lights limited. And honestly, what's interesting to me about this format is if you look at the top 8 of that calling, it was a pretty stacked calling top 8. And I think, from what I heard as well, we've spoken about this format a lot, very enjoyable format, skill intensive, I think. And so seeing a lot of very strong players make it into the top 8, ultimately taken down by Jason Rolfe, who is right up there in the Player of the Year standings, especially from that European standpoint, has been doing a bit of globetrotting so far this year. So congratulations to Jason. And then the Battle Hardened on Sunday, which was Classic Constructed, so another snapshot of Classic Constructed, was taken down by Gravy Bones, Brody Spurlock on Gravy, taking down, I think, Michael Hamilton on New in the final as well, which is always fun to see those two Road Warriors, US Road Warriors out there playing another Battle Hardened finals. So, yeah, I think elsewhere in the news, I just want to reiterate this coming weekend is calling Bologna. It's I'm calling it kind of like week 1.5 of Nationals. We're going to get another snapshot of how everyone adapts, from a European standpoint, but also just globally between weeks 1 and weeks 2 of Nationals, where next week we go into the full launch of Nationals around the globe, over 45 national championships taking place over the next month. And so, yeah, lots to happen. Lots for this meta to evolve. Of course, we spoke last week. We won't get into it too much in this main topic of the pod, but we've got a lot of heroes close to Living Legend. Azalea, of course, Dash, Inventor Extraordinaire. Who else is close? I mean, Florian is not... it's not impossible that it will Living Legend in the first couple of weeks. New, of course, is very close. So, yeah, a few heroes very close to that Living Legend. Lots of things can happen in the space of 2 weeks. But that's it for the news, I think.
Potentially Kano as well. We brought that up last week. But yeah, I can't believe you just monologued the news past the point of letting me glaze my boy Marjan. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to bring us back to a US Nats winner and just talk about how awesome his journey has been. You brought up the limited portion of it. I mean, he worked so hard on this and has been working hard on it before Nationals as well, right? He went 6-0 in limited in PT London.
Really?
So at a high tier.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well.
So since London and US Nats, he's actually 11-1 across his limited games at tier 4. Yeah, PT is tier 4 and then US Nats is tier 3.
What did he play at London?
It's which hero?
Yeah.
I believe it was Verdance.
Oh, that's the problem. So he played Verdance once, wasn't good, and now that it's good, he had the limited already there. So I think you're right, it was Verdance, yeah. So he had the limited standpoint, but he went into the wrong deck into London, but this time had the right deck. Love it.
Exactly. So, so obviously you shouted him. It does feel strange to shout him out because you mentioned content creator for other games. At this point, I mean, he's the World Tour weekly host. So for us to shout him out feels weird because he's kind of already gonna probably talk about US Nats on the World Tour weekly, which I'm sure almost everyone watches. But yeah, obviously super glad that he made it. It was a long time coming, I think. So far, his wins and results have mostly been on the CC side of things, and it's so great to see him to also succeed in the mixed format.
I can't wait for in the World Tour news this week, national champion me.
Yeah, have you seen the meme going around where it's the meme of Obama putting a medal on himself sort of thing?
No, I haven't, but
everyone's sharing that around. That's going to be this week's World Tour Weekly episode.
Love it.
Cool. On to the Command and Cookout. Our question this week comes from Fancy from the Discord. Question is, post-US Nationals, do you believe the new heroes meta share correctly reflected their power into the field? Why or why not? My short answer is no. I think a lot of the Gravy Bones lists in particular weren't fully tuned or optimized, which I mean makes a lot of sense, right? This was first weekend of release. But what I will say is go check out Yuki's Gravy list, which is now on the official FabTCG website. There was an article, it's called a 0 to 80, I believe is the name of the series. She's put out the Gravy Bones list, and I will say that that is a very strong list. Internally, that's one we all been afraid of. And to spoil a little bit, to tease a little bit about the main topic, Hayden keeps talking about how Verdance is super, super strong right now. And I'm going to say, internally, we don't feel so anymore because of this Gravy list, basically beating her up, and the Earth Hero is really, really bad. And still having game into aggro. So I recommend go checking this out.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't deny that Gravy is very good into Verdance. That is very much true. I think it's interesting to see how the meta unfolds. I think for me, just to this question, do I believe the heroes meta share correctly reflected, the new heroes meta share correctly reflected their power into the field? I think, I might have expected Gravy to be the 5th or 6th most played deck. It ended up being, I think, the 7th most played, but it was there or thereabouts. I honestly didn't expect to see Marlin or Puffin. There was 13 people that registered Puffin, which was actually honestly kind of surprising to me, because I've actually spent a little bit of time with that. That was the sort of first hero I gravitated towards coming out of, spoiler season and things like that. And it's been unfortunately pretty underwhelming to me. So I was quite surprised to see, more Puffins and Dash IOs, for instance. Marlin, I think, while Azalea is around, I think I don't think there's a whole lot of reasons to be exploring Marlin. I know you have been, Pankaj, you might sort of see it differently, but you're also doing it with a cannon, so you're doing it post Death Dealer potentially anyway. So yeah, I think it's probably there or thereabouts for me, honestly. It's about what I would have expected to see. The meta share was really flat, which we kind of spoke about, that this meta share would probably be very flat for US Nationals, and it was that. And Gravy was probably, it's in that 5 to 10% bracket, which is what I expected for week 1. We will get into where it goes from here, because I think it's only up for Gravy from here.
In terms of his power into the field, I think his power into the field is way more than just being 5 to 10% represented. So yeah, I do expect his meta share to increase as the lists get more optimized. I will say all the high seas heroes are very deep, and they're quite complicated, both playing wise and deck building wise. Yeah. So I believe the optimized versions, their meta share at US Nats does not reflect the optimized power level, but we're just taking a moment to get there, which is obviously normal.
Do you think this is the most complex set of heroes we've had come out in a single set? Like the average level of complexity for a set for Class Constructed?
I think so. Like, I think the other one that comes to mind, like MST was pretty complicated, but it just had such a high power level that it kind of didn't super matter for a lot of time. But yeah, I do think MST probably is the one that comes close. Bright Lights is sort of like in the other direction, where it was complex, I think, but the power level was so low that even once you solve the complexity, you're like, wait, this is still like whatever. So yeah, I would say High Seas is fairly complex. Is that some? I think Rosetta. No, Rosetta wasn't as complex as this, or MST or Bright Lights. I think. Yeah,
I think
I'd say this one is
a lot of heroes, a lot of sets are signposted, right? Like you said MST, and I'm sitting here being like, yes, very complicated to put my 9 chi plus all my Tiger creations into my Zen deck.
Putting the Tiger creations in a Zen deck was what people started doing, and it was bad. Like the first few lists that were running, like Chase the Tail? No, not Chase the Tail. What's the Head Leads the Tail?
Sure.
No. So the first few lists that were running Head Leads the Tail and Roar of the Tiger, those lists were terrible.
Yeah, but those cards are bad. So anyway, I think sure, but the optimization. Yes, but I think it was pretty clear to get to 80%. I think it's not clear to get even to 60% of these heroes. I think Rosetta, a lot of signposting with having to play Earth or Lightning cards in your deck, for instance, right? I think
it was a little too.
Yeah, I think it has been one of the most complex. I think I have to go back to, honestly, I think Uprising was quite a complex set from how the heroes came out. Icelander, Dromai, what was the other hero on that set? Fi. I think
I maybe a bit less.
Yeah, and I think that was overshadowed by just stubby hammerers and a bit belittled and kind of how ridiculous Fi could be out the gates. Because I think I obviously pointed to Zen from MST, but I think similar kind of. I think Nu was probably the one that took maybe the longest because it's been the most in flux and it's maybe the least powerful of the three, I think. Enigma just didn't match up well into the meta when it came out, but people were pretty quick to be like, oh yeah, this card is broken, Mirage. So yeah,
Phantasma class.
Yeah, the list didn't actually change massively, like the base of the list didn't. So whereas I honestly think we'll see base of lists change. I mean, you look at the gravy list that made top 8, you look at what Yuki posted on FabTCG, you look at, I think, honestly, what I've looked at so far with gravy, I think there's a lot of different avenues potentially. So yeah, that's really interesting. I think it's a great question as well there from
Arlen as well, I'd say.
Yeah.
Arlen as well, for sure.
I think that's the most unknown as well, right? Like it's really unknown. Puffin, I think, is very unknown. Like I think there's so many different ways you could potentially, do you play any boost cards at all? Do you play some? Do you play lots? Like it's going to look very different. How many crank items do you actually play? Is this a crank deck or is it a use crank at situational times to leverage the ability? It's going to be very, very complex. So great question there from Fancy. If you want to get your questions in for the Commander Cookout, please do so. You can drop them in the YouTube comments below if you're watching on the video platform YouTube, or you can drop them in Spotify. Actually, I've been looking at Spotify recently to gather comments as well. If you're an audio listener, you can email us at arsenalpassfab@gmail.com with your question. If you're an Arsenal Pass Patreon member, you can also go into the Discord. We have a channel there set up. You can go drop your question as Fancy did so, or you can drop us an in-person question. Pankaj, did you get any questions over the weekend at US Nationals in person?
No, someone did say they were going to pass me one after I was like a little more free, but they never came back.
Disappointing.
So I didn't get any.
Disappointing.
Rip.
Right.
I know.
Let's get into the main topic. We're going to talk about how US Nationals has set the stage for this national season to come. To be honest, for this Classic Constructed season to come. But I'm going to just put something out there straight away, Pankaj. I think it's set the stage, but it's just put the first prop on the stage. It's kind of told you where you're going. You know the event center that you're going to. You've been told which stage you're going to. You don't know exactly what's going to be on the stage just yet because there are so many things that are going to change over the next few weeks. Forget Living Legend. We already spoke about Living Legend. That is going to happen. There's going to be Living Legend changes. But there's going to be changes to how popular decks are, what people are doing with even the existing heroes in terms of the way they're building them. I'll talk about one in particular as we get into it. We're going to see meta shift of, I think, a reflection. I'll tell you what, Syndra was the second most played deck at US Nationals. There is no way that deck is going to be the second most played at anything after this, for instance. I mean, it was insane that it was the second most played deck. We'll get into that. But this meta is going to shift so rapidly, so quickly. There's many things to come. So we're going to try and give you the lay of the land in terms of what we think will happen next and how to get set up for potentially your nationals, or even if you're going to calling Bologna this weekend.
So I think let's start with the top 8 because I think we've already touched on the meta representation. It was very flat. Some things were a little strange, like Syndra being second most represented was definitely very, very strange. Not entirely sure why she was second. I expected her to be decently represented, but not after Florian. Oh yes, it's Syndra.
Yeah, Florian wasn't as flat.
Garbage.
Florian wasn't as flat. Like I think there's a real steep drop off between Florian and Syndra, Azalea, Prism, and then you kind of have like 3 steps. I would say you have like Florian, and then you had Syndra, Azalea, Prism as the second step, and then you step down again to like the Arachnes, News, Gravies, Arachne, Kano, Vincent, Fangs of the world, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So let's move away from the representation to talk more about like what did well, because Syndra did really, really bad. Top 8, there were 2 Florians and 2 Verdances, so like total of 4 Earth heroes in the top 8. Question is this... Oh, and then the remaining top 8 there was a Prism, a Nu, and a Gravy, and an Azalea. So 6 different heroes across top 8. So still, it was fairly diverse. I mean, it was very diverse. But 4 of them were Earth heroes. Do we expect this sort of thing to continue? I personally think that Gravy will be propping up. I think Gravy is going to have a little bit of a hold on the metagame, a little bit of a warping force on the metagame, very similar to Enigma. And so that makes me think that the Earth heroes that did well this top 8 are probably not going to do so well moving forward.
How many players in US Nationals? Do you know? Remember?
I don't remember the top of my head.
Or what?
Like 400-ish?
Yeah, so, yeah, sounds about right. So, I mean, 25 Gravy decks, right? 6% of the meta. I mean, it's going to be more like 10 to 15% upwards hitting. It's going to go from a new hero that's seeing a bit of play and a bit of exploration this weekend to a meta player over the next couple of weeks. Potentially, one of the best decks in the format, right? So It's going to go, even if it's tier 2, it's going to still increase in terms of its playability and the rate to which we see it. I think it's going to go to more of a 10 to 18% sort of representation deck over the next couple of weeks. So I think you can kind of you can take that and bank that one. I think that's kind of what I want to do here a little bit, is like step back, because top 8, talking about the Earth heroes, etc. We kind of called that last weekend. Like we said last week, on the pod, we said Earth is very strong. Florian, probably the most played deck, and coming into this weekend, it was the best deck coming out of the last format. I shouted out that I thought Verdance was potentially the best deck in the format. You sort of disagreed a little bit. Gravy was a big part of that when you spoke about it, and actually I think you mentioned as well as being two tough things for Verdance. I kind of thought Gravy wouldn't show up in massive numbers this first week, which obviously didn't, which helped Verdance obviously ultimately winning the event. Nu also showed up, but not in a massive amount, right? 30 copies, so half the amount of the most played deck in the form of Florian. So Verdance,
it was shared with Nu was shared with Mario for some reason. Like Nu are the same number. Like Mario actually had 31 and Nu was 30, and I think that was also a slight surprise. I expected Nu to be higher represented than Mario, but I think that was part of it as well.
Yeah,
I'll continue.
31 marionettes, so about 25 of those probably did the wrong thing and should have played. I really don't understand not playing Nu while it's still around, as especially when I think Verdance is very strong heading into that weekend. I was surprised to see people picking up marionette, to be honest.
With Florian and Verdance being as good as they are, I would rather be on Nu personally. But I think if Gravy starts pushing the Earth heroes away, I could see a reason to be on marionette over Nu moving forward.
Yeah, we can talk about that. I'm curious about your view on that one. What about Azalea? Would you rather be playing into Azalea?
Oh, Nu.
100%, right? So I was very surprised. I thought Nu was going to be like the third most played deck. I was quite surprised. So
Assassin was the most represented class.
Yes.
It was shared with Runeblade because Vincent plus Florian was 85. The Assassins put together were 84. Okay, yeah. I guess they're about the same. So about the same. The thing is, with the cross Slippy, Marinette, and Nu, who were all Slippy was 23, the Nu and Marinette were 30 and 31.
Yeah.
So they were all represented. But yeah, carry on.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I think let's just get into it. Do you want to quickly cover off new heroes? I mean, we kind of did a little bit in the question that we just had, but we do have some stats that we can kind of talk to, because we do have win rates from the Classic Constructor portion of the event. So do we just want to quickly cover off Gravy, Marlin, and Puffin?
Yeah, sure, let's do it.
How did Gravy do?
Right. So, I think you're going to lead us into it. Yeah, so Gravy, I think, had a 43% win rate. I'm looking at this correctly. It's so hard to also put into context about that. These are a lot of new lists, right? Like, for example, if you look at Brody Spurlock's Battlehardened winning Gravy list, that's also so different from even Yuki's list, and also very different from what made second at US Nats as well. Like, Brody's list has 9 golden tipples, for example. I was speaking to him about it, and he said he would run 15 if he could.
Yeah.
So
very different for you to Jacob.
Very
right?
different. Exactly. Yeah. But for this opening weekend, it's like 43% win rate. I said already, I think it's going to be meta warping. I think it's going to be Enigma level meta warping.
Yeah, and I think
who's allowed.
Just thinking about the list, right? Like, I want to shout out Jacob Shaker, because that's a top 8 Pro Tour competitor right there. Like, Jacob is a very good player. A lot of people can't believe they didn't bring AB into the finals, and I think Jacob has a lot of experiences. Again, like I say, I believe a semifinals competitor from Pro Tour 1 is, like, when I've seen Jacob play, I've always been very impressed with the level of play, and I think you gave some context actually to the no AB as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna back him up over here for people who might be hating on that. He actually played Margin in the Swiss and beat Margin on AB0, so that's why he did the same thing in the finals.
Had the plan. And to be fair, Margin drew a lot of arcane damage in the first 4 turns and got to put, Jacob down to a fairly low life total, so the game looked quite drastically different based on the first couple of turns of the game, right?
Yeah, he did draw quite, I would say, a bit higher than average than on arcane damage compared to what that Verdance list normally would draw, especially like double rampant growth as well. Yeah. On the Pulsing Aether, like send 10 on like turn 3 or something, which is obviously a massive, massive deal.
Yeah, and the Verdance list that Caleb played was very much a value Earth deck, right? Like it didn't play Millennium Tree, it didn't play a whole ton of arcane damage. It played Cadaverous Tillings, it played a lot of attack actions, and yeah, it was a lot more reminiscent of what you might think of maybe a Florian deck, to be honest. But obviously it has Stormstriders, which is an insane card. Still has access to the combo, still has health pots, etc. The old 4 health pots that it now has access to, for instance. So a bit more of a value deck with a combo kind of element to it, as opposed to a wizard deck with some attack actions and a combo element, right? It's definitely more of this Earth value-based deck that we saw.
Yeah, it's kind of like you take Icelander, but you make her more bull, like Bulllander, but you put more bulls in it and you take away some of the arcane. Is kind of the way to think about it. Where Frostex was always available to her, but she only played it in like very specific matchups. Same for this. Like the healing pots only come in for very specific matchups, and every other time you're kind of just 2-for-8ing your opponent again and again.
Do you want to speak to it all to Marlon and Puffin? I think we kind of did to Fancy's question. I mean, I think there's just so much more to explore with both those heroes. It's going to take time, and I honestly don't think either of them are going to have much of an impact on this national season. I think it is Gravy who's going to have the impact and I think we both agree, a fairly significant impact. The level to which I think maybe it sounds like you are a little bit higher on the impact that Gravy's going to have. Like you might be thinking that Gravy might even be the best deck in the format, it kind of sounds like, or at least one of the best decks in the format.
So it's interesting. So yeah, let's talk about Gravy for a little bit more, and then I'll move on to Marlon. I think he's going to be meta warping. I am uncertain a little bit because I'm starting to hear some rumblings that there are other decks that we haven't thought about in a while that actually might have a decent Gravy matchup. So I'm not entirely sure if he's going to be oppressive and like actually be strictly best deck the way Enigma was, or whether he's going to control. He's going to be meta warping in some ways, where he's going to allow certain decks to play and come back in, and certain decks not. So, for example, I'm hearing Dawnblade Dory is actually pretty good into Gravy. And I'm also hearing, surprisingly, Jarl actually can be a little bit tough for Gravy because you can blow up the compass. If you blow up the compass early enough, it actually makes Gravy's job a lot harder. And Dawnblade Dory, for similar reasons why it was going to Dromai. Well, okay, no. It was going to early versions of Dromai, and eventually Dromai's realized they should just play 4 dragons at once, and then Dory's could never beat that. Except Gravy doesn't quite have that option, also can't block on the way to playing like 4 allies a turn because he's drawing his allies.
Yeah.
So I've heard that. So it depends. I have a feeling, just going by the trend of how Illusionist, and Gravy is an Illusionist basically, there's a trend of how Illusionists will solve their like initially looks pretty rough matchup to make it fine for them. I feel like Gravy is actually just going to end up being like Enigma level, where it's just strictly the best deck. But there's a chance where he's just meta warping, where it's like, okay, certain like Earth heroes aren't allowed to play for now. Jarl and Dory are like the value-ish decks that are allowed to play. And maybe some of the warriors.
I think there's actually quite a few angles into Gravy, which we can get into with some of the other decks as potential players. But Gravy has still a decent chunk of restrictions. Like it has these differences in the way that it plays to Illusionist. It doesn't have the built-in go again. It doesn't have the ways to go as wide. But it does.
Well, have you seen Yuki's list? Because it does though. Like still Water Swell and Golden Tipple.
Those aren't allies.
Still Water Swell.
Those aren't allies, though, Pankaj.
Bro, but I mean, it still sends 20 at you and develops a board state piece, and you're kind of just like, wait, like how does it happen? Like how is this okay? Because it goes like still Water Swell, and then it sends a bolt at you, and after it plays an ally and attacks you with an ally, and that's aggro level numbers, and there's a board state piece for you to deal with.
Yeah.
It feels like that happens quite a bit.
Sure. I definitely agree that Gravy can be built as an aggro hero, but what I'm saying is it's not an illusionist in the sense of how it develops the board. Like it's quite different in that regard. But
right, yeah. I was saying illusionist in terms of it beats every slow deck, and then it still has game into aggro. Sure. I'm talking about the sort of the
what it covers
meta spread.
Yeah.
Yeah, the meta spread. Enigma was kind of strictly the best deck because you're like, any slow deck doesn't have a chance into you. And then when you play against Aurora, you are still playing a game. It's not like you're getting beat up by the Aurora, which is kind of how Gravy feels as well.
Yeah, they printed this card called Traverse the Universe. I don't know if you saw it. It was quite good.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Which kind of gave you a 1-card pivot. It was pretty brutal.
And Gravy has Belittle. Gravy's Belittle blocks 3, which is
Yeah, I mean, still was.
I don't know.
I had to double check that card was a pirate card. I was like, this card is definitely a pirate card, right? Okay, yeah. Good. This card could be.
Okay, but he's the only one with compass, so he can actually see if it's gonna hit and then block with it if not. Whereas the other two kind of just like you can't make your play whether you hit or not. As in, you can't like build your turn around that when you decide your blocks. And at the same time, he's also the one with a very variable resource sink because of the graveyard. He has 2 or 3 different allies in there. He can actually use the extra resources a lot better than the other two can. But the other two don't even know whether they're going to get it as well. So it's like a lot worse than them compared to him.
Marlon could technically play it and look at the top of the deck. A little Skullbone cross-wrap action.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, yes, I suppose. Should we move on to Marlon?
I genuinely think that Marlon should look to explore Skullbone cross-wrap. Anyway.
You know who else told me that over the weekend? Levi, actually. Got to have a chat with him, obviously, since he's also Ranger player, obviously Azalea stan. And he showed me his Marlon list, which does have cross-strap in it. So it'll be interesting to see. Also, speaking of Marlon builds, Pablo Pintor put out his 0 to 80 article, I believe just earlier today as of time recording a few hours ago. I will be taking a look at that. I haven't gotten a chance to take a look at it. But I know it came out, so I'll be curious to see his thoughts on it. Also, Riptide player, so he has some Ranger experience as well. And obviously, he's freaking Pablo Pintor. It doesn't matter what he's experienced or not. He's gonna he's gonna have a good deck. So that'll be interesting to see. On my end, it's strange. I think overall it feels there are certain things about KO, like certain things about Marlon which remind me of KO. But if you remember, KO had to really pick and choose his power cards. You couldn't just slam like Castbones and Bloodrush Bellows and like whatever else in your list because they all don't play nicely with each other. Like when you draw Castbones and Bloodrush in the same hand, you're like really annoyed and really sad. Marlon gives me a bit of that vibe where you have to pick and choose which power cards you want to play. So for example, Return Fire is a powerful card, but you can't run it along. It doesn't play very nicely with like codexes because if you ponder into it, you're really sad. Unless you want to run Trench, but then you're running Trench. It doesn't play nicely with like 3 of a kind. Also doesn't play nicely with like just a random card draw that you're already doing, like gold tokens and stuff. And then you don't have a bow that loads in the cannon version at least. So you want a lower arrow count, but then that makes a 3 of a kind a lot less reliable. So there's all these little there's things that are working against each other in the deck where the powerful stuff works against each other.
Yeah.
Yes, anti-synergy, which makes me... I can't tell the deck building is super deep, or at this point is the hero just awkward. Because there's also a whole bunch of power cards where the resource curve doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Like Big Game Hunter, what's the yellow pay to draw discard one?
Trophy Shot.
Trophy Shot, yeah, Big Game Trophy Shot. And you kind of like, wait, this costs 2. You really want to activate the cannon and send a harpoon. That costs 6. So then this whole play costs 8, and that's really strange because 7, you're like, okay, 7 makes sense with gold, right? You pay into gold, draw blue. Okay, cool. You can play into that. 8 is like, how does this fit into a resource curve? So I'm to a point where I'm like, is the resource curve just awkward, or is the deck building deep? I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, I think that's gonna be interesting for Marlon. Let's get in and talk about what's next. Let's talk about the top decks, where we go from here. I have nothing to say about Puffin that I haven't already said, to be honest.
I was gonna say you just skipped over Puffin.
I think
you've been brewing Puffin.
I have, but I think I've said all that I have to say about it. It's interesting. There's some things you can look at with cogs, with boost. There's a lot, again, similar things like some of the anti-synergy and synergy, actually, interestingly. But I think ultimately my challenge with Puffin right now is it doesn't feel like there's payoff there for Puffin, and like it can spin its wheels, it can draw a bunch of cards, it can set up a bunch of like items and stuff, but ultimately it's like, okay, but max velocity is maybe the best mechanologist payoff. So are you gonna play that, or are you not gonna play that? If you play it, your deck has to look different.
I do think a big part of it is that neither Puffin or Marlin have Compass. I actually think that actually makes Gravies like, because the whole pirate side of it cares so much about a top card of the deck. You talk about swells, you talk about just the draw discards like Golden Tipple and stuff. It's just
Skullbone Crosswrap.
The Compass helps so much.
Skullbone Crosswrap.
I mean, it maybe like maybe that's the way to go. But I mean, again, you can't do it on the opponent's turn, so you still don't get to plan your turn around it, right? So it does make a difference that way. But I have been like, man, if I had Compass, I would play these cards, but I don't. Also, the pirate cards want you to discard yellows, and Marlin Puffin don't super have
Yeah,
yellows
very
that
true.
you'd like discard. Gravy is just like, oh yeah, I want to get rid of these cards anyway. Whereas Marlin, I'm like, I don't want to play big game trophy shot, but if I want to play Golden Tipple, I guess I have to play big game trophy shot, and it's like, okay. So it does feel like the pirate side of it also needs to be explored further in Marlin and Puffin to see whether how much value can you actually get out of those cards. Because Gravy's blue base is like totally chilling, whereas the other two it's a bit rougher, I think.
All right, let's get into where next from here. This shape of this metagame, best decks, best potential decks. We have some win rate data from US Nationals Classic Constructed portion, which is great. Going to lead off with Verdance. Obviously, it's the Nationals winning deck. It had the highest win percentage through the Classic Constructed portion at US Nationals. You know, you think a mid 50 be a great win rate. A high 50 be an outstanding win rate. What about 64% win rate for Verdance? And it's not a small sample size. As much as, you know, there was only 20 odd copies of the hero. It's, you know, it's still I think, the 11th most played deck or something. Like, there's still a big chunk there. Still 129 matches or so with the deck. 64% win rate. Obviously, it's one event. It's worth taking into consideration. But did speak about how strong Earth is. Did speak last week that, again, I thought Verdance was one of, if not the best decks in the format, especially heading to this weekend. Sounds like you think that changes as Gravy rises. Is there any other considerations for you? And where do you actually ultimately place Verdance heading into calling Bologna and then into week 1 of Nationals?
So I think a big thing as well to talk about with Verdance, like, yeah, had a massive win rate, 2 in the top 8, fairly different lists as well, which I think is interesting to talk about. For example, like, I mean, we were talking about like different lists for like the gravies and everything else, but like Lucas's list, for example, didn't have any potions in it, like any healing potions at all, which is a pretty significant difference. I think so he sort of made the call that he can beat the slow decks without needing that entire combo side of it. I do think if Verdance picks up, though, you probably need healing potions in the list, because in our experience, when you're playing the mirrors and one side has potions and the other doesn't, it's pretty miserable for the side that doesn't have the potions. So you might have been making the call that Verdance wouldn't be as widely adopted, which, I mean, was correct. She wasn't very widely adopted. And if you can dodge a mirror, you can get away without potions. I think if Gravy goes up, I do expect Verdance's position to go down. We've been thinking about tech on the Verdance side, like Midas touch, like potentially, and you can go again, like Scar for Scar stuff. That's kind of like how we were keeping pace with Aurora and was also going to Enigma. Maybe it could be a thing, but I'm going to put a low probability on that. I think the aggressive Gravy list that put a lot of damage on the board while setting up board state does offer quite a bit of a problem. Verdance does have some play into it, though, because the arcane pings, once you're online, can target allies. So the lower health allies, like the Rigor Mortis and the Limbits, you kind of can have efficient ways to clear them. So maybe there's something there, but it does need a lot more cooking. For now, it seems like Verdance is on the back foot in that matchup.
So where's Verdance overall as we head into week 1 of 4 Nationals, calling Bologna?
What sort of answer are you looking for? Because I know you hate tier lists. So how am I supposed to answer that question? Like,
is it one of the best decks? Is Verdance still one of the best decks in the format?
Oh, I don't think so.
Okay, interesting. Okay.
Also, is new still legal? If new is still legal, I will also say no.
Yeah, I think new obviously traditionally has a favorable matchup into Verdance. New leaving, I think, is good for Verdance, right? That was kind of one of the other things I think when I was thinking last week about the power of Verdance. I was like, I think it's one of the best decks in the format, and I think it only gets better for it with new. Obviously, you know, since then, played a little bit more of the Gravy matchup. It looks like Gravy's going to be better than maybe I first thought. In terms of its impact on the meta. So I think that's going to hurt it. But Verdance is still very powerful. New is going to go soon. Earth is very strong. Felling the Crown is just a bonkers card. One of the things I think that's so strong about Verdance, we'll talk about Florian in a second in terms of maybe some of the restraints with Florian, is that Verdance plays cards like Cadaverous Tilling so well comparative to Florian. Because Verdance, if your opponent doesn't attack you, Verdance goes, okay, well, I have arcane damage. Like, I have other forms of damage that I can throw at you. I have these storm strides. At some point, I will kill you, and I can deal with having to take bad value for a little bit. You have to attack me. You have to kill me, and then because you're attacking me, I'm going to be blocking with these Earth cards. I've now got another 3-block Earth card in my deck. I'm going to block with my defense reactions and turn my hero ability on, and then I'm going to get even more value. And yeah, also I'm going to play 2-card 8s. I'm going to play my version of Wounding Bull, right? So that also fills my graveyard with more Earth cards. So I just think the base of what Verdance has to work with is just really powerful, and I can't see a world where it's not. Honestly, now with these aggressive decks gone and Enigma gone, that it's not one of the best decks in the format. Gravy is the challenge, right? But I think as well, if you are quite, and I think Kano is actually a bit of a challenge, but if you were quite nice into a lot of the other parts of the format, I think you're good into Florian. Florian is really tough for Florian, and that's one of the other best decks in the format.
Super favorite.
Yeah,
Florian.
Azalea. I think you're good into Azalea. So assassins, I think you're good into the non-new assassins as well, in my experience. So I think you are in a very good. I think it's just hard for me to say that Verdance isn't going to be one of the best decks in the format for the rest of the national season.
That's fair. Yeah.
Took Florian.
Don't disagree. I do agree. Everbloom Life was such a massive upgrade for the deck. It was funny. On stream, like Brian asked me, like, "Oh, what changed? Why is Verdance suddenly so strong?" And I was like, "Yeah, you gave us a blue non-attack block 3, a Earth non-attack block 3. Asking that forever." And then she's good. Oh, actually, also we have to point out, Burn Bear was actually a very big upgrade.
Yes,
as well.
it is.
Like a lot of people read that and they're like, "Oh yeah, it's for like anti-Prism." It's like, no, it's just 6 arcane on a stick.
Yep.
It's so incredibly strong. And I think some people, like to your point about they have to attack the Verdance, like some people think, oh, give the Earth Hero a big hand, they can't do much with it. I think cards like Fruits of the Forest like help that so much. Like when they're online as well, they're like, discard Fruits, here's 1 ping as well. And then suddenly they're converting their hand at a decent value, and then you're just falling further and further behind.
And also their weapon play, regardless of what weapon they're playing, Waning Moon, Surgeon Aether Tide, depending on their plan, like they can always utilize that weapon for value when they play off bigger hands as well. So it's just like, okay, like even they do things like they're like Surgeon Aether Tide, and you're like, oh, crap. Are they going to come in with an arcane damage after this, or are they going to come in with a Felling of the Crown or a Cadaverous Tilling? And you're like, okay, take it. And they're like, cool, well, I'm going to arsenal my Tilling this turn, and instead I'm going to come in with this Pulsing Ether Life or whatever. And then, or you're like, no, I'll block it. I'll Arcane Barrier. And they're like, cool, here's a Cadaverous Tilling. You're like, oh, man. Like, it is awkward. It's tough.
Why don't you start us off on Florian, since you have the most experience with that?
Yeah, I think, my view last week was that Earth is the best thing to be doing in the format heading into that first week of Nationals. I thought that Florian was top 2 deck, probably second best deck. I was edging Verdance slightly ahead, I think, just because I think the hits to Florian are pretty significant, right? With Germinate and with the staff as well. Like I think that is the Scepter is a pretty big impact. And I wasn't sure that people would know what to do with Florian. And honestly, I think I was right. Like I think I look at the Florian decks that showed up. Someone that I tested with Damakai, he messaged me, he's like, how many Channel Mount Heroics do you think are in the top 8 of this event? Because we talked about what we thought Florian would look like, and I'll get into that in a second, post these changes and what the format was going to look like. And I was like, I would have said 6, but the fact you're asking me this question makes me think it's probably 3. And he's like, 1. And I was like, okay, that's very surprising to me. So I think the lists were not what I expected. By the way, I'm not saying the lists were, not good or anything like that. I think, obviously, congratulations to the players, an amazing effort, and they found a line and angle they thought was good for this format. I think it changes a bit going forward with a bit more understanding of what the format looks like. I think Channel Mount Heroic is a very important card for the way this format is shaking out. If Gravy, Bones, and Verdance are 2 of the best decks in the format, I think there's no way I'm not playing 3 Channel Mount Heroics in my Florian deck. And I think actually, one of the questions I had last week was, what is the aggro deck of the format? Apparently, US Nationals players were trying to tell me it was Syndra. Unfortunately, that is definitely not the case. And I think it's Florian. I think Florian is the aggro deck. So I was surprised at how mid-rangey still these Florian decks were, I think. And I actually looked down, not just inside the top 8, but down to the top 64 as well at some other Florian lists. And similar, very, very mid-rangey builds out there.
I think even on the news side, like it does feel like without CMH and without Germinate, I'm just kind of like, doesn't the Florian just get fatigued every time? If you can't do the offensive overlap with CMH, and you no longer have the end game Germinate, like how are you beating New as well? So I do think CMH should probably come in, especially Gravy. Now the point about Syndra, yes, he crashed and burned, but if Gravy does go up, I do wonder whether Syndra comes back to being the aggro deck of the format, because Mask of Momentum is just really strong into any ally-based deck.
Well, the problem is Syndra would have to be playable first. I think it's the problem with that.
All right.
So play another Mask of Momentum deck. Honestly, play another Mask of Momentum deck. I don't understand the Syndra thing.
Actually, speaking of decks that sort of can get value off of hitting allies, I think one deck that might improve, I already had a good performance this past weekend, but might improve is actually Prism. I think Prism into Gravy, from what I've seen so far, is actually quite okay. And once you set up allies, you're giving them free soul, and that can be pretty tough.
Yeah. Let's talk about Prism next. I wouldn't mind just quickly finishing up on Florian. I think it's still one of the best decks in the format. I think it has, again, I just think Earth is so strong. I think you've got so many different ways to build into it, build with it, change. You've got the card pool. You can change the way you play. You've got your equipment access is very large in terms of what you can play. I mean, we haven't even seen people messing around with creepers at this stage yet, right? And I think there's definitely play to that there as well with Florian. So there's lots of different ways that I think you can take Florian. I'm definitely going to explore a little bit with Florian, because I just think that I'd be remiss not to be spending some time with the Earth heroes, no matter what the format looks like, because of the power level of them. So I think for me, I do now start to think that the 4 or 5 best decks in the format look like Verdance, Florian, Gravy, and then we'll get to the other two very shortly.
Yo, go play Nimby in Florian. Bring back Belittle Briar.
Bro.
Nimby Florian, let's go. Let's do it.
We all know that Belittle Viscerai was where it was at, man. Hey, US
That was partial to Belittle Briar.
US national champion, anyway. Margin Bay, took that deck to a Pro Tour. That's all I'm saying. All right. You want to talk about Prism? I think it's worth shouting out. Obviously, Andrew Cook, fresh off top 8 at Pro Tour London, makes top 8 US Nationals with his beloved Prism. I think very interesting to me. Prism on the power level spectrum actually feels kind of so to me, but I think Prism has a really good angle into the format, to your point. Very good into Gravy. I think it's very good into Verdance. Yeah. So that's, if I think...
Not so good into Florian.
Not so good into...
Florian.
Well, but if they're not playing Channel Heroic, it gets a lot better, I'll tell you what. Like, I think...
Yeah.
I think it depends on what these Florian lists shake out. Like Kano, which I think is also, if we look at the win rate, Kano had a 57% win rate, was one of the top 10 most played decks at the event, and I think is a good deck. I think traditionally Azalea is, I think that's Prism favored from memory. I think that's, I know it's not the same as the old Prism, but I think it's still Prism favored. I think
so,
maybe someone can correct us in the comments. It's not a matchup I've played a lot of. And then
also be point flippy. I can see it being that way as well.
Prism into Nu.
Oh, it's Prism favored.
Yeah. So
Nu can tech for it, obviously. But yeah, it's Prism favored.
Yeah. So I think basically it's Prism in a very good spot. I do think the power level of Prism can be a little bit overblown by some people. I actually don't think Prism is particularly strong, like powerful hero, 32 life, some awkward deck building constraints, not a lot of access to massive turns. Like people go, oh, you've got a combo in your deck. You don't really. Like that combo is so hard to set up. It's such a pipe dream in a lot of matchups. But Prism does benefit from a lot of these other, aggressive decks, true aggressive decks not being around, from Gravy Bones being in the format, from Wizards being in the format. So yeah, Prism is interesting to me. I think its stock has got to be on the rise.
Pause a little bit. Wait, which combo are you talking about? That's a pipe dream.
ALS loop.
Are you talking about the loop?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, the loop is sure, that's like a Christmas Land thing. The combo is super easy. You just have Figment of Erudition on the board and you draw ALS, and that's a combo.
Sure. The setup. I would refer to that as the Prism, like Erudition ALS setup. But like, it's a value play, right? It's a setup value play. It gains you a lot of value over 2 turns. Relative to the value that you have to lose to set it up is not huge. So yeah, no, I agree. I would just refer to that more as a setup. The loop or the combo that people like to refer to in terms of like locking your opponent out is
that's
not very real.
Ever since the Tomes were gone, that's like not really a thing.
I agree.
Yeah.
What do you think, Prism? Where does it sit for you?
I'll put Prism in one of the top decks of the format. Yeah,
I think so too.
I think you have to be considering Prism as we move on.
Yeah, I think it's a meta piece though. I think it's going to flux depending on the meta as to how effective Prism's going to be moving forward. But I think it's definitely got to be a contender. So yeah, we've got 4 fairly sizable contenders there. Let's go to Kano next, because Kano did show up in some way, shape or form at US Nationals. I think it was the 8th most played deck by the looks of it, and had a really strong win rate as well at the event. I think it was like 57% or something. So one of the strongest decks from a win rate perspective, with a decent amount of representation. How well positioned is Kano right now?
That's interesting. I don't think his... Do you have any idea about Kano's Gravy matchup? Because I think currently it's like in flux, but like Gravy does have access to... Well, I mean, everyone has access to Arcane Compliance, but like Gravy wants blues, he can play Arcane Compliance. And has the other prevention card that Jacob was running. I forget the name of it. It's an instant...
Throw caution to the wind.
Throw caution to the wind, yeah, that one as well. And AB3, like Jacob Shaker's list, for example, did have AB3 in it as well. So I do wonder whether, and especially if you're playing the more aggressive Gravy list that actually can put pressure, like the one that has the whole bunch of go-agains in the form of Tipples and still Water Swells. I'm going to hedge. I think Kano will be not great in that matchup. It's good into Florian. Verdance can tech for it if she wants to. Well, I say tech for it, yeah. Can you play like a Seeds of Tomorrow or two, and you absolutely have a game. So I think he's like fine. It does depend. I do want to, at some point, we need to talk about the Warriors as like potentially, probably, I don't know, if the Warriors do come in, then suddenly I could see Kano being like super well positioned. But for now, I think he's there, but I don't think he's like a top contender.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think Kano is on the outside looking in to me. I think we've spoken about 4 of the best decks in the format. I think we'll speak about No in a second. I think that's the one that's kind of on the cusp for me. It's probably, honestly, I think for me it's that and Azalea. And then I think Kano is kind of in the mix, right? And I think it's gonna, like, my question was, what I wrote down in my notes was well positioned or people didn't bring Null in question mark. And I think some and some. I think it's some and some. Like, I think the format is so flat and wide that some people are gonna have to, because of deck building or meta expectations, take the punt and being like, actually, I can't be playing. I'll use an example, right? We go back to Worlds in Osaka, you go back to PT London, and you look at Enigma lists. And you spoke about the Gravy versus Prism matchup. And there's some similarities there, I think, where it's like, you're like, oh, Enigma's favored in that matchup, right? And it's like, well, if you don't have AB3, and now the Kanos have understood how to play this matchup more, it's actually Kano favored. If you don't have AB3, it's definitely Kano favored.
There was a difference though, because Waning Moon did clear board, whereas it doesn't against Gravy, which is a bit of a difference. But yeah, see, you're right. I do think Gravy does need the AB3 probably.
Sure, I guess what I'm getting is the fact that that I think because it can put a lot of pressure on, so it might be a little bit different in that regard. But also the piece is just that, are people going to cut their Null? Like, they're just like, well, actually, you know what? But I think what's going to hamper Kano a little bit is that Verdance is one of the best decks in the format. And I think even though I look at Margin's list, I'm like, yeah, great read, play a value-based deck. If they throw AB3 into you, you're like, cool, well, I don't actually lose any value because I gain what I lose from my arcane damage. I've gained in value from my attack actions and having the equipment to block it or to stop on-hit effects, for instance, that I might have minimal on-hit effects. So I think Kano suffers a little bit from Verdance's success, unfortunately. So I think that's another, I guess, knock against Kano at this point.
Also Prism. If we're expecting Prism to be one of the top decks, and I mean, Kano to Prism is absolutely miserable.
I can't see registering Kano personally. I mean, I can almost never see registering Kano personally, but yeah, especially not now. Do you want to talk?
I mean, Burn Bear helps
against
Prism, I guess, but not
enough. Not enough.
It's like from 5% to like 15%.
Yeah, correct. I want to talk about, let's group the Assassins and Warriors as a next port of conversation. I want to talk about Azalea quickly, because Azalea did, of course, make top 8 at this event, and took out Verdance in the first round of was it Verdance? Yeah, took out Lucas Oswald, right, in the first round of the top 8. Had a very strong win rate over the weekend. I think it was around 54%. It was the 3rd most played hero, which I don't think is hugely surprising. I think Azalea was looking quite strong coming to the weekend. We did speak about that as one of my call-outs as well. I think Azalea was looking quite strong. People were going to pick it up. I also felt that people would default to it as a sort of aggro option as well, which I think we kind of saw. So yeah, Azalea is interesting to me. I think if I just look at the matchup spread, I think that Earth Heroes can be a bit of a challenge for Azalea. But again, it really depends on build and how they're set up as to whether that's true or not. And then, yeah, I don't know. Your thoughts?
I think the New Horizon lists can be like fine into the Earth Heroes. I'm not going to be like, oh, you're super happy to sit across the Earth Hero, but I think the New Horizon version can actually set up 6-card hands. And another card that I think is that maybe we could see more of, given if you're expecting to play against Earth Heroes and maybe even Gravy, is actually Codex of Inertia.
Yeah,
which the New Horizon list already can use. And that was a card which Lucas was really scared of. He was we were talking about it before his top 8, which was against the Azalea. He was like, how many Codex of Inertia does the Azalea player have? Because if they have like 3, then I lose every time, and they have like 0 or 1, then I probably win. So
it's a very reductive
that's
way to
a card that people. Obviously it's there's more nuance than that, but basically the point I'm trying to make is that the good Earth Hero players are nervous about that card. Yeah. So I think a New Horizon Codex of Inertia build of Azalea can be good into Earth Heroes, and I think so far Azalea has been underwhelming into Gravy Bones, but I do wonder if maybe that sort of take and maybe give her some play as well. I mean, she did pick up some good cards into him from High Seas, like Swift Shot, for example, comes to mind. And the bolt and shot stuff, you can maybe have some turns where you are sending some variable amounts of damage to different allies, or like, not overkilling an ally too much and still getting to send something to face. I do wonder whether a card like Midas Touch can maybe come in to help play out the smaller allies, which you don't really want to send an arrow into, like a Limpet or something. You can like Midas Touch it maybe. Maybe even Barbara Barrage. She probably doesn't have resources to play Barbara Barrage. Never mind, I'm going to take that one back. But yeah, the Earth Heroes, I could see her being okay. Gravy is still, I would say, rough. And then Prism's like a coin toss out, and New is bad. So I'm going to put Azalea in like a not super well positioned as the meta evolves.
I think Azalea is downtrending for sure. I think this is the weekend to play Azalea. I think it's going to downtrend from here. So that's why I kind of say like there's 4 to 5 top decks, I think, and Azalea is kind of like trying to petition for like that 5th slot, but I think it's losing it after this weekend if it even had it beforehand. Let's talk about the Assassins, because I do think New is right now, before its Living Legend, one of the top 5 decks of the format. I was like you, I was super surprised to see the split across the Assassins and New not as represented as I thought it would be, and instead the Assassin was kind of, the players split themselves across. Honestly, a deck that I think is kind of close to unplayable and Heracles slipped through the cracks at a high level. Like, I'm not really... I've just struggled every time I try and pick up that deck and be like, oh, maybe it is better than I think it is. And I don't know, to me it feels like it's such a specific meta pick, and a wide open meta is not where you want to be playing Arachne slip through the cracks. I'm being a bit hyperbolic when I say basically unplayable. I just mean in a wider spread. I think it's quite tough. Marionette I do kind of get, but I have some concerns about Marionette into Gravy, especially. Yeah.
I could see... Well, I think Slippy and Marionette are could both be better than Gravy than New, actually. So New, to be fair, New I think might need to go back to like looking for scrap stuff and maybe even playing in the backside, and then you can have like a fine Gravy matchup. But there's still like a high number of blues you have to play in the deck that sometimes you might just have
a nothing hand,
too low power output of a turn, or just have a turn where you literally couldn't clear an ally because your hand just doesn't do that much damage mathematically, and that can put you really far behind. Whereas Marionette in particular, very quickly, at least the builds that are popular right now, very quickly gets into the Hunter's Clave Graphene Calistera setup, which I actually think can end up being quite good for clearing allies. Does have some amount of go again as well, and can also do the variable damage. And you can fit in Pain in the backside Marionette. You will need to tune it to have a bit more go again, but once you play the Pain in the backsides and stuff like that, and you play for getting to Calistera Hunter's Clave endgame, like as in you do that by like turn 2 or 3, I think you could have a game into Gravy. And Slippy, I think, is like similar to Enigma, right? Probably the best out of all 3 of them into Gravy.
Oh,
because of its natural.
Yeah, I think Slippy's the best of the 3 of them by far into Gravy. I think, if the meta starts to coalesce a bit, maybe towards Singapore, I could actually see Slippy finding a reason to register it, right? I think for now, I think, you're not going to be able to guarantee there's going to be enough Slippy, or it's not necessarily what you're targeting. I think you've got some other tougher matchups to worry about in the meantime. So I think for me, it's like, I also, Marionette, I also struggle a little bit with that hero, and I understand everyone's, the Callisto, and we spoke about this last week. The difference between when you Graphene on turns 1 or 2 or versus 3 or 4 to me feels so significant. And the hero ability of that hero, just I honestly think I'm done playing that hero. I actually played quite a lot of that hero, and I'm just like, it reminds me of my Brute days. The frustration is coming to a head for me playing that hero. It just doesn't feel consistent and powerful enough for me. Or consistently powerful enough, I guess, is probably the right thing, because it does have power at times. But the turns where it's low power feel pretty bad.
One thing that I think is really strong about Slippy and Marionette both is that Kiss of Death is functionally unblockable, which I think is just one of those things where you'll innocuously suddenly be bleeding life, and you're like, wait, how did I take this much damage? Oh yeah, it's because you couldn't put a blocking card in front of Kiss of Death if you didn't want to get blown out by Tarantula Toxin, and then Kiss of Death also got flicked at you for an extra 2 damage. So it ends up being like a 0 for 6 a lot of the times, which I think just ends up bleeding you out faster than you might expect it to. For that reason, I do think they're strong. They also play like Scar Tissue and stuff to pump Kiss of Death, and then works well on the daggers. As well.
Again, it revolves around one specific card, though. This is my problem with the consistently powerful statement, is like, there's specific, like, it just, the difference between when you draw these cards and in what turns you draw them and the numbers of you draw them versus like other decks that have just a higher floor, I think is what it gets to me.
I mean, they have other powerful cards as well, like Codex of Frailty and Bonds of Agony and Persuasive Prognosis, Justin X, stuff like I mean, it's majestic deck, right? It's an assassin. It has other power plays aside from Kiss of Death.
But then the consistency comes in. It's like, yes, I've drawn my bonds. I don't have an attack reaction in this hand. Like, it's just not the hero for me. And honestly, I think if you look at results, it hasn't put them up as well. Like, I think there's a reason, is because it's exactly what I'm talking about. It's this consistency of power. It just isn't there versus what other things are doing in the format.
Mm-hmm. Once the meta narrows, like Slippy was best during Enigma Aurora 100%. Meta, right? Like, I think that was even like Michael Hamilton played Slippy at PT London, for example, because it was Enigma Aurora, and you're like, wait, Slippy is like fine to both. So yeah, well, I think once the meta coalesces, if it does coalesce around Gravy and like the aggro deck that beats Gravy, then you could see Slippy just totally coming back in.
Yeah, I like decks or heroes that can lean into narrow metas. I always think that's really interesting. We've had other heroes in that space before. They're always like fascinating decks to me, but they're often not playable during, or I say not playable again. They're not things I would register during open seasons, because I think you're just asking for gem roulette, to be honest, at that point, and I'm not here for it. Do you want to talk Warriors? Let's kind of finish up the top deck discussion on Warriors, because Warriors did have a good weekend from a win percentage. Obviously, nothing hitting top 8, but Dories, I think, had like some kind of ridiculous win rate over the weekend. And was like kind of recently represented, had a 54% win rate. So it's not massive, but Kasai had a really good win rate and was like reasonably represented. It was probably a bit of a surprise. Similar, again, 54% win rate. So Warriors had they're probably the surprise of the weekend in terms of what they did. Some solid results.
Yeah, and we spoke about Dawnblade Dory. I think Dawnblade Dory is the one that I think is the one that to me is the most interesting, because I think that is the one that you can actually make a Gravy's life difficult, because they non-blocks a fair amount of time. They're also the sort of deck that does want to keep big hands. They're not like Dromai, where they could just keep one card and resolve a dragon, which not like that's the way Dromai used to play into Dory anyway. But the point was, like, Dromai had like good one-card hands, right? They just keep one card like Snatch You or something, or even like Blaze Headlong You or whatever. Gravy doesn't quite have access to that. Like some Call to the Grave lines maybe. But typically it's like they do need to resolve their allies. They can't do the play 4 allies at once. And then they're drawing non-blocks in the process as well. So I do wonder Dawnblade Dory can like put pressure on Gravy, and if there's some other aggro deck that is trying to beat up Gravy, Dawnblade is good into aggro as well. So that's where I'll be. I have my eye on her, but Earth is still very much in the mix, and boy, is that miserable. Playing Dawnblade Dory into Verdance or Florian is just get me out of this. It's like, put me anywhere but here.
So much the challenge for many heroes in this format, and I think we'll wrap up on a few ones not to play in a minute. Just quickly, why do you think so many people registered Kasai? It was it almost as played as Verdance? Yeah, it was similarly played to, the Dash IOs of the world, the KOs, the Celios, etc. It was 15, so it was slightly lower than that kind of tier 3 of decks. Like we spoke about, like Gravy and Kano, etc.
I honestly couldn't tell you. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I don't like Kasai into the Earth Heroes. I'm not a fan. It's like in theory, Kasai's like you're like, oh yeah, playing into a Dudley deck that wants to block a lot. Like you're like, oh yeah, Kasai should be decent. Not into Earth Heroes. I think she does very badly against Arcane, and they both deal a fair amount of Arcane
They also
damage.
just outvalue you
And they're also blocking.
in the late game.
And they're also blocking a whole bunch of non-attacks as well. If it's a Dudley deck that's blocking with attacks, I'll be like, ooh, okay, Kasai's looking good to me. But these decks block with a lot of non-attacks and D-reacts and deal Arcane to you, and I'm just not super happy because Kasai's position.
They both just
into
massively
Gravy?
outvalue you in the late game as well. Like once both their hero abilities turn on, you're just like, oh, this is miserable now.
Exactly. And into Gravy as well, I don't think you put on the same amount of pressure as like a Dawnblade Dory does. And you're not farming the allies to as much value as Dawnblade Dory does, so I'm not fully convinced about her position there. Into Assassins, though, I tell you, into a Nu, give me Kasai every day. Dawnblade Dory into Nu is actually, I think, favored for Nu, but Kasai is just beats up.
Fair enough.
So maybe that's why. Maybe they're trying to farm the Assassins.
Yeah,
That's the only thing I can think
makes
of.
sense. Yeah, okay. Let's wrap up on some of the decks that were disappointing and maybe just a general vibe on if any of them have more upside than what they showed over the weekend. Let's go from, I guess, the most played to the least played. We can go through a couple of them. I think we already kind of spoke briefly about Syndra. I was super shocked. I think you kind of mentioned Syndra, might be an option. People might show up with it, and I was like, oh yeah, maybe Pankaj is right. Maybe it'll be the 5th or 6th most played deck. Maybe I'm wrong. 2nd most played deck. I do not understand it. The hero had a 43% win rate over the weekend. I'm not really sure why people chose to play it, other than maybe they thought Gravy was going to be 50% of the meta. I think if you're looking to play an aggro deck, look to Florian, look to Azalea, look to one of the assassins, even honestly. Look to, honestly, most anything else other than Syndra. I'm a little bit confused about the Syndra piece.
It could be that they were, I don't know, maybe in some ways ahead of the meta in some aspects, because I do think once Gravy come into his own and becomes a force of the metagame, I'd be surprised if Syndra isn't the best aggro deck into it.
Sure, but it's the best aggro deck into one deck of the format. Like, do you want to play Syndra into Florian? Do you want to play Syndra into Prism? Do you want to, I just, I'm not so sure.
That is a fair point, yeah. It could be maybe they're expecting more Gravies than what actually showed up, and maybe that's what they were targeting. But otherwise, I'm with you. I was surprised that she was 2nd most represented. I was expecting her to be out of like the classic aggro decks. I'm not putting Florian in that. Out of the classic Pharaoh decks, aggro decks, I did think she would be the highest, but I didn't expect her to be the 2nd most played.
Let's talk something very near and dear to my heart. It's Shadow. I've been pretty outspoken on Shadow, and then I think Shadow heroes after Chain have been pretty bad. Fundamentally, they have a lot of, I think, problems with the card pool that they have to play. Their hero, the hero design is pretty problematic, I think. I'm talking about Levia and Vincent here, but we'll
yeah, because you said after Chain, and I was like, after Chain, there's only been one Shadow hero after Chain. Why are you talking
post Chain not being legal is what I'm saying.
Right.
But we're going to talk specifically about Vincent here because Vincent was fairly represented. One of the top 10 most played heroes at the event, and had a pretty tough weekend. 44% win rate. Kind of not surprising to me. I don't think Vincent has ever really been good. There was a glimmer of hope after Rosetta, and I think if you hadn't played into it the first time you played into it post Rosetta, you're like, wow, this deck feels powerful, depending on how the opponent drew. And then you play it a bit more, and you realize that it is a classic Shadow deck where, yes, it will win games, and you will not be able to do anything against those games that it wins, but a lot of the time the deck is awkward, and the onus is on the opponent sitting across from the Vincent in terms of how they play into it.
Yeah, I was high on Vincent at PT London, and I saw what happened at PT London, and I was like, oh, I was wrong about being high on this deck, and I'm kind of still in that same boat. I think the thing is, I'll see Vincent say like, oh, I've set up triple Malefic, and then like they're popping off and they're sending all this rune gate, and then they still die, and they still just lose the game because the opponent will just block them out. They'll leak a bunch of damage,
but
block them out, and the Malefics are gone, and then Vincent's like, pass, like banish one card and pass, because they actually couldn't do anything, and then they just lose the game, and it was like, so, and like you can't when it draws up that way, it's also hard to like space out your malefics and stuff. I don't know. It's
tough.
too inconsistent, and yeah, I'm not high on this hero anymore.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I would love to play Shadow Heroes. I would love them to bring out a Shadow Hero that isn't. But I just think that's the design. I think that's the design of Shadow. Is that's the kind of way it plays out, and I think that's fine. And a lot of people actually gravitate towards that, which is cool. It's definitely not my thing, and unfortunately, I just also don't think it's been particularly powerful. Basically, yeah, like I say, since Chain hit Living Legend. I want to talk about Fang because we spoke about Warriors. Fang has been a hero that has not had success and has been, kind of seen as just hasn't quite done it so far. A few people brought Fang to the table for this event. It was just outside the top 10, 20 decks played, so more Fang than Verdance, and had another really tough weekend. It just Fang in it, right?
Yeah, I've heard Fang is good into Florian. From like Florian players I trust who are good, they say they don't want to play against Fang.
Okay.
They're like, it's rough. They end up getting outvalued by the Fang. Like the Fang comes online earlier than them typically,
Sure.
and after it's just really hard to beat. So maybe that's what they were targeting, but it does feel like I'm not entirely sure what else he beats. I guess he beats New. So I mean, actually that being said, I can totally see the logic. If you're trying to beat up News and Florence, which I think was expected that it would be fairly highly represented, then you could maybe bring Fang.
Okay, so you win 40% of your games, which is about what Fang was winning. Like that's kind of my problem when people go like, "Oh, here's an angle to the format with this hero." I'm like, "Yeah, you're right. It does have two good matchups. I agree. What is it doing against everything else?" Like, just if this is my if one piece of advice from me from a washed player, my piece of advice is, if your hero isn't fundamentally good, don't play it. Like, if it's got a couple of good matchups, but it's not a fundamentally good, consistent, powerful hero, you probably shouldn't bother trying to play that at a high level event. Armory, ProQuest, Callings, even if you want to and have some fun, go for it. But if your goal is to win, that ain't it, unfortunately. And
I was just trying to back up the Fang players, man. But yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah,
it makes sense.
And don't get me wrong, because
you have these good matchups, and what are you doing against everything else? Like,
and don't get me wrong, like, there's times where the format narrows, generally tier 4 events, and the meta sort of tightens a little bit, and you can make some really great meta picks, and that's the time to play some of these heroes. But I think that's kind of my view on it.
First weekend of release, it's way too wide.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Bring something that's supposed to narrowly target something.
Sorry, Fang. Lastly, Azalea. Azalea was the one that was interesting to me. I actually thought Azalea, I was like, I could see Azalea making top 8. It almost did. Not surprised who it was in the hands of. Mr. Vore, pretty classic. Had an okay win rate, 48%, so slightly below 50%, but above some of these other heroes. I think fundamentally, if I'm going to talk about my fundamentals of just powerful heroes, I think Azalea is a more powerful hero than Fang or Vincent. We spoke about aggressive decks. You want an aggro deck to play. Why not play Azalea? It's kind of this combo aggro deck, and I think it's quite interesting. Is it tier 1? No. Is it kind of in that second echelon of decks? Maybe. Like, it might be close to it. Like, I do think that the hero is kind of powerful.
If the assassins get pushed down, by the
which they might
coming up, then I could totally see Azalea coming up, because I do think he's good into the Earth heroes. He's still going to be rough into Prism, I'm pretty certain.
Sure.
So I mean, he kind of is aggro. It's been maybe coin flippy, where it's like maybe he just like blows them up because they are at 32 before they can do the thing. They also can make action points, so you might not get juiced by an ALS. I mean, no, you probably don't get juiced by ALS. You just pop your Lightning Greaves. So yeah, it could be coin flippy, but yeah, you're good into the Earth heroes. I don't know how he's into Gravy. I imagine he could be decent, fairly good, even if you can just blow them up really, really soon, to your point, where he's like the aggro deck of the format. And the zero cost shock is massive. Like that is a scary upgrade for the deck. So I think it does come down to where the assassins land, because that's a brutal matchup for the Azalea.
Yeah, I think Azalea has some questions to answer, and I think maybe Gravy players work out how to play against you, and it doesn't eventuate to be as good as you might want it to be. But what I'll say is, I think if I'm looking down the list of available heroes in that kind of second, sort of outside the top 5, and then because I think we spoke about Verdance, Florian, Gravy, and New. To me, they're kind of the 4 at the moment, and then I think like Kano, Azalea are like on the kind of outside looking in a little bit. We didn't talk about Jarl. I think we can leave that for another week. We need to see how that might shake out with people trying to bring that. But then I think, honestly, I do think Azalea is kind of in that next group of heroes after that, and is potentially quite interesting. So I definitely think it's worth a look.
I think Jarl is worth a look. Yeah, we won't go in it
No.
too much, but I think the fact that he can blow up
Yeah.
the fact that he can blow up the compass is, I think, is like a thing to look at, because then he can actually have a decent game into Gravy. A lot, as we spoke about, a lot of their cards rely on them knowing what the top card of the deck is, and you can just like take that away from them early in the game and then do that. And like even into like new, for example, like I saw, I forgot what the player was, but there was a Jarl player against Michael Hamilton in the Swiss rounds. And Michael Hamilton was a new at US Nats, and yeah, the Jarl like blew up the mask for like turn 3 or something, and after just end up fatiguing him, or like killing him with damage towards the end.
Fatigue by damage.
In any case, like had like both avenues, right? You have the better weapon and everything.
Yeah, the problem is still Earth.
Yeah,
I think.
yeah.
The problem is still going to be
Earth is tragic. Earth is absolutely tragic.
I mean, I think just to wrap the episode up, I think the defining things over the next few weeks is going to be Earth. It's going to be, I think you're right, I think it's going to be Gravy Bones, and I think it's going to be what is the aggro response to potentially Gravy. Like that to me is like the three things of the format heading into these next couple of weeks. I'm interested to see how things play out around those three elements.
I tell you what aggro deck it isn't. It isn't Katsu, because oh my god, Katsu had a miserable win rate this past weekend, like 33%.
Small sample size,
and I mean it's terrible.
Size.
Yeah, it's terrible into Earth. You
really
just
bad.
can't get it on hit into
So
Earth. And I actually don't think it's going to Gravy. I don't think it's an aggro deck for Gravy. Similar to how Katsu was not good into Dromai. It's just really hard for you to send the correct amount of damage to the correct thing, because you need the on hit to because so much of his stuff relies on whether you got your Katsu off. So sometimes you're like, I need to send my Surging Strike at the stupid small health thing, the stupid 2 health Sawbones or whatever. Because if I send it at face and I block it, my turn just ends. Then you send this there, and after I send my Whelming at the face, but then that's so easy for them to block, and it's just and you end up sort of just getting fatigued as well, because you're kind of just like discarding your stuff, sending damage at allies, and then you just end up like losing out on value, and then you're bad into Earth as well, and you're inconsistent. So it's sad because Bonds of Ancestry got unbanned, and Retrace the Past is a good card, and then you see still a little bit.
I know.
rough.
I played like 6 or 7 games, and I was like so excited, and then my spirit was completely crushed, unfortunately. So, oh well, is what it is.
Rip.
Well, that has been episode 217 of Arsenal Pass. A look into what the next few weeks might look like post US Nationals. Very interesting meta. I honestly I'm going to go out on a limb here and say this might be one of the most interesting Classic Constructed seasons we will ever have, or at least we've had in recent history. It's one to watch. I think it's going to evolve very quickly. There's a lot of things to figure out. There's so many questions remaining, and I think we're going to see a lot of those start to be answered. Calling Bologna this coming weekend, of course, then we go into that first week of national season on the lead up to calling Singapore. Lots to play for, lots to find out. Special thanks to Arsenal Pass patrons, and until next week, we'll see you in the next episode.